The topic for today's discussion is a development path to a systemic perspective. Our world is overflowing with complex challenges as daunting as the pandemic and the climate change, and as common as choosing a partner and raising our children. Viewing the world through the lens of living systems for complexity changes nearly everything about the way we might manage and lead organizations. Together, we'll explore a pathway to developing your capacity to perceive and therefore coach systemically, whether that is with individuals, groups, and teams, or more broadly. Together, you will identify the systemic coach's way of being. So, welcome all again. Today, the panelists are Josie and Francesco. I will briefly introduce who Josie is and Francesco is, and then we'll hand over to Josie to take over from there. Any question and answers, you can just put it in the chat box and the panelists will take it as the presentation progresses. Josie has been fascinated by the intersection of strategy, people, process, and change since early career as a corporate strategic planner. In 1999, she commenced her executive coaching practice and was president of ICF Australia in 2003. During 2009, Josie received the International Coach Federation's President's 2009 Award for her contribution to the professional coaching industry in Australia. A passion for a sustainable world fueled Josie's doctoral thesis that involved her as an external change agent within a client organization to understand how an organization might transform itself to nurture people and planet, just like a person might, from the inside out. She has developed expertise in complexity, organizational sustainability, and adaptive leadership. Increasingly, her work is turning to teaching others, those in positions of authority and sustainability practitioners, how to move forward within complexity. Josie continues to research and publish as a visiting research fellow, UNIS Social Business Center University, and she is also a co-founder on the Global Climate Coaching Alliance initiative. Her latest book is Big Little Shifts, a Practitioner's Guide to Complexity for Organizational Change and Adaptation 2020. Welcome, Josie, to Coacharya's Awake, Aware, Arise conference.
Thank you very much, Smita.
We have Francesco Vassallo. He is a highly qualified agile coach and IT delivery leader with extensive experience over 25 years in public and private sectors in Australia and the United Kingdom across a number of industries. Experienced in business agility coaching with leadership, teams, and individuals in new ways of working and capability development. Welcome, Francesco. And with this, I'm handing over to Josie.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Smita? I didn't check the volume before. Are we okay?
Yeah, I can hear you well. I hope the attendees too can.
Okay, terrific. So it's lovely to see you all here today. And I won't say too much more to introduce myself really, other than to say that developing this perspective on how we might exercise our leadership and indeed how we might coach leaders in organisations and how we might lead within organisations is becoming increasingly important in this complex world of ours. And I want to share sort of a combination of stories and also kind of an analytical approach to this. And I wondered, as we enter into this conversation together, if in the chat box, you might just let me know if you've actually heard Peter Hawkins talk about coaching systemically. So I'd love to know what sort of base we're working from today. So can you just type a yes or a no into the chat box for me, please? Okay.
Josie? Yeah.
Yeah. Might have
Sorry.
caught you by surprise.
Sorry. Can you just maybe repeat the question so that
Yeah.
people
I
can get
was
it?
I was wondering how many of you present today may have had the pleasure of listening to Peter Hawkins, Professor Peter Hawkins, talk about systemic coaching. So you've heard him talk about systemic team coaching. And I'm wondering how many of you have heard a presentation by him, how familiar you might be with the term. So could you just let me know if it's a yes or a no, if you've heard him speak? Thank you. Oh, Lydia, you're a surprise attendee. Lovely to see you here. Must be early in London. Okay, a couple of yeses and a couple of nos. Okay, so I'm going to introduce some ideas that may be quite unfamiliar to some of you. And so I would really invite you to ask questions as we go. So if you're sitting there going, what is she saying? Please type a question into the box so that I can illustrate it with a story or answer your question, because I would really like you to leave here today with a few things that you're familiar, that you are aware of. I would really like you to leave with 4 things today. So the first major thing is an understanding of why we need a systemic approach now. The second thing I'd really like to leave you with is a bit of an idea about what living systems and complexity, what these terms mean, and what the implications of those terms might be for the way we think about leadership, change, and even the way we think about organisations and how they're structured. So I would like to leave you with a few ideas and a few insights around that. And thirdly, I'd like to offer you some thoughts around identifying a pathway to developing your systemic practice. So if we want to be systemic coaches, if we want to contribute to helping our clients address some of the major existential challenges that we face on this planet, then what are the questions we need to ask, and how do we actually develop ourselves to the point of asking those questions? So as I'm talking about coaching questions, I need to be clear about where my expertise is before we start too. So I'm an expert in complexity, I suppose. I'm a complexity living systems practitioner. I work with other practitioners. I don't actually teach coaches to coach. So I want to offer you what I've learned from the perspective of working with practitioners and being a practitioner in the space, but I won't actually be giving you coaching questions or anything like that, just to be clear. And fourthly, I'd like to open up a bit of a discussion with you around the different pathways to a systemic practice. And Francesco has, a colleague here from Adelaide, has very kindly offered to share some of his story to promote that conversation in amongst us as a small group. And finally, I'd like to leave you, I've got a link to a website where you can download the first couple of chapters of my book. And that will cover a lot of the content from tonight too. So you can download that for free, and I'll pop that in the chat box at the end. So feel free to ask questions as we go. I'll stop at a couple of places during the presentation anyway, and seek questions or comments. They don't have to be questions. Sometimes it can actually just be a comment, and that's fine too. And then at about the 60-minute mark, I'll invite Francesco to share some of his story, and it will be much more of a free-flowing conversation between us. So I'll just see if I can share my screen. Oh, that's not worked very well. Just one moment, please. I always get this round the wrong way. Here we go. Right. Can you see the major screen, or is it showing the wrong one?
It is showing why systemic approach
Can
required.
you, yeah, can you see two slides or just one?
Only one.
Beautiful. It's got the right screen then. We're in luck. Terrific. So that's not quite where I wanted to start though. So the first question I want to address is, why do we need a systemic approach now? And I think the answer is simple in a way. The answer is that the challenges that we're facing are growing ever more complex over time. And I think the coronavirus, the pandemic, has actually done us a favour in a sense. I know a lot of people are suffering dreadfully, so I don't mean to discount that. But this rather ugly looking diagram that I've created here is an illustration of what we've all become so much more aware of, I think, through the pandemic. During the pandemic, we've watched a whole systems change. We've been participants in a global whole systems change. And overnight, we watched things like working from home happening. We watched changes in food supply chains. We watched changes in manufacturing supply chains. We watched changes in the way we educated our children. Some of them were withdrawn from schools, some were educated from home. We watched changes in transport. Air industry has been obliterated. So has the boat cruise industry by and large. There's not too many people volunteering for a cheap cruise these days. The way we've work's changed. Health has changed. The way we, here in Australia, we actually are now able to consult our doctors by phone rather than having to go to the surgery, which they never used to let us do. So we have seen industry after industry, system after system change all at the same time from this tiny little virus. And it has really graphically illustrated to us the interdependencies between all of those systems. They were always interdependent. We've just become a lot more aware of it. And some pre-existing trends have really been accelerated by the pandemic too. So the flexibility of working from home, the way we've used technology, for example, are existing trends that have been accelerated. And we don't know what the future will hold. I don't know how people in your countries are talking about the pandemic, and what might be on the other side of it is a phrase that's sometimes used here in Australia. But we don't know, and we don't even know if there will be another side. So it is really uncertain. And you've probably heard this expression VUCA that originated out of the US Army some time ago to talk about volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous circumstances. This is really a description for living systems, or complex adaptive systems, as they are sometimes known. And these VUCA conditions really challenge us at the very deep levels of our sense of control in the world. And we don't understand, like, how are these things happening? And we don't understand what the future will hold. So it makes us feel quite insecure in many ways, I think. And the pandemic is just one of the challenges we face. And Magda actually asked me if I might include something here about some of the work that I do with the Climate Coaching Alliance. And so I have. So I hope that you don't find this too confronting. But we are in a pretty difficult position globally at this point in time. And this is a diagram that a friend who is publishing a book, and in fact there should be a reference to it on the slide. I'll make sure that that's put in the chat box at some stage. But he's releasing a book in November about this. And really we've got one crisis after another crisis. Like, once we're through the pandemic, we've got the economic crisis to live through. We've got climate change as a climate. We're in a really dire position in terms of climate change. And that has implications for biodiversity and just the ecosystems that we rely upon to live. And some people are talking about human extinction. And so this picture is a pretty confronting sort of cartoon, I think, and raises for us the complexity of the situation that we're in. It's just becoming more and more complex. And already we've been trying to deal with some challenges like climate change since the 1970s, and we still haven't dealt with it. There's a new report just out in the last few days, the Climate Reality Check report by Breakthrough, I think it was published by. And it really says that if you're familiar with any of the reports from the United Nations over the last few years, and the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, if you're familiar with any of their reports, this latest report is saying they're way too conservative. Climate change is advancing much more rapidly than we ever imagined. And in fact, we could hit 1.5 degrees increase by 2024. And in fact, this latest report says we may have already hit it, and it's only 2020. So what does that mean? That's the big thing that I think many people miss in their lives, that they can't translate something like an increase in 1.5 degrees warming around the world to what that means for our lives. And I'd like to just flesh that out a little bit. And I'll invite you in a moment to perhaps pop some thoughts into the chat box about what you're noticing in your local world as well, just in your local neighbourhoods even. Because we talk at these global levels, but we live at a local level, don't we? So we've got climate change and the world warming, but that's not the only challenge that we face. And the other challenge that we face is really around resources. And we are using more of the planet's resources every year than the planet can renew. So it's like we were living off the interest in a bank account and gnawing away at the balance at the same time. And it makes sense that you're not going to have anything left in that bank account after a period of time, doesn't it? And the ecological footprint is a similar measure. It tries to compare how many resources Earth has in total that are renewable with how much we actually use. So there is only one Earth to use each year. And currently, as a global community, we're using 1.75 Earths per year. That has fallen just recently in 2020 because of the pandemic, because of the slowdown in economic growth throughout the world. And so there's a really graphic relationship between economic growth and the amount of resources that we use. So that has fallen this year, but already China's economy is picking up really quickly, and they're very proud of that. And that's good on one hand, because it means people's livelihoods are returned. And it's bad on the other hand, because we are now using more resources than the Earth can produce again. So that is the definition of unsustainable. You can't go on using more resources than are replenished each year, and because we're going to get to the bottom of that bank account at some point. So I could go on about that, and we could talk about a lot of different statistics about how many species are being used and lost, each year. It's around about 200 to 2,000 species are going extinct each year. And you might think, well, what does that have to do with me and how much I've got to eat and how much I've got to drink? And what resources do my children have to live off? But we are really reliant upon those other species and those, not just other animals, but the other flora as well, the other plants, the forests, we are reliant upon all of those for the conditions in which we live. If that ecosystem collapses, then it is very likely that our own civilizations will collapse. And that is the point that this latest report, the climate reality check, is actually mentioning this year in 2020. It's warning us that if we don't change our ways, that our very civilizations could collapse. And indeed, they are predicting that perhaps if that happened, the population on Earth may collapse to about half the level that it is at the moment. So from about 8 billion people to 4 billion people. It's a fairly daunting prospect, isn't it? And I'm sorry if I'm being the harbinger of bad news for the first time for you. And perhaps you might just take a breath. And I know I have to at times. And I've recently come into contact with more of Peter Hawkins' work through the Climate Coaching Alliance. And this is a model that he allows us to use in the Climate Coaching Alliance as well. And I really like it because it recognises that we're all at different places in this journey of becoming aware around where we are at in terms of climate change and also ecological emergency. That some of us are just becoming aware, we're just at that curious stage and starting to discover more about the interrelationship between the environmental, the social, and the economic crisis that we're all a part of. And then after a period of time, people usually start looking into it more deeply and collecting more information for themselves. And they start to become more informed. And as they become more informed, it's not unusual for people to actually become emotionally involved and a little bit emotionally overwhelmed, to be quite honest. I went through a period of a few years when I first became really aware of what was going on in the world. I can remember it very graphically. It was 2006. I was doing volunteer work with the Pachamama Alliance at that point in time. And it was a very disturbing couple of years. I think I was very close to clinically depressed for a couple of years. I'm not suggesting you should do that. But I am suggesting that if you feel a mixture of emotions as you become aware of what's going on in the world, that you just know that that's really normal, and you will work through it and talk to people, remain connected with people. It's really important. And as we work through becoming aware, we often become engaged. And certainly a lot of coaches I'm talking to and with at this point in time are engaging with their own set of values and saying, what's my piece of the jigsaw puzzle here? What's my piece? What strengths and passion do I have to bring to this challenge? And where will I offer that work? And I've talked with coaches in the Philippines, for example, who are working with LGBTI youth in a very strongly Catholic society where being gay is not acceptable. And so, you know, I'm aware of this coach who's doing that work because it's actually something that she feels passionate about, and she feels that these people should have somewhere to be included and to work through the challenges that they have in their lives. I know other coaches who are working in organisations around climate change. I know other coaches who are working in community, and I donate some of my time to local communities here in Australia as well. I'm working with one local community not far from me who last summer was, their community was just burnt to the ground by the bushfires. So we become more and more engaged and more active in society around taking greater and greater responsibility and trying to influence people through our wider professions and through stakeholder groups as well. So I just wanted to share that cycle with you because I think it's really important. It's important for us as people, and it's important for us to recognise that that's what our clients are going through too. You know, they may be completely unaware. So there's no point imposing our engaged selves on them. If they're completely unaware, we just start very gently, and we can open up these conversations with them gently. And that's what the work of the Climate Coaching Alliance is about, really, is to learn how to do that. So I wondered if we might pause for a moment and just take a breath, because that's a lot to take in even now, isn't it? So as you're pausing and reflecting and acknowledging the reality that we're in, I wonder if you can just reflect upon what you see and care about in your local neighbourhood. What is it that you're seeing locally that connects with this global story? And if you're able, I'd like to invite you to pop a few words into the chat box so that we can share that together. I'm going to be game here and just stop sharing that screen so that I can have a look at the chat box. We are living in what many call post-truth world. Yeah, Greta Thunberg is doing a great job, but then we've got people like the US President Trump who are denying the climate reality. How do you influence these sorts of people, and how is the Climate Coaching Alliance impacting leadership? That's a pretty big question. But I guess we influence what we can influence is my answer. And I remember Sir John Whitmore was one of my friends when he was still alive, and we were talking about development. And I remember him saying one day, you know, you can develop your clients, but if you do nothing else, develop yourself. So, so I suppose we start close at home and we take care of our own business and we influence what we can. And certainly I think it's becoming apparent that governments don't actually have the answer to these questions. I think the answer to these questions might actually lie in communities, and or more so in communities. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts about that. Linda is saying locally, hearing birdsong, gorgeous, very nice. Lorna, are we able to use the human extinction cartoon with appropriate referencing? Yes, you can, and I will make sure that I put the appropriate referencing in the box before you go, because I thought I had it on that slide. And it is a scary cartoon. Also feel it is a loop we have gotten into. Yeah, we're kind of caught up in it, aren't we? And we're struggling to find a way out. And really that's what I would like to share with you as we move forward. And I'll just check the time. And I'm on time, yoo-hoo. You can have small miracles sometimes, can't you? So let me share my screen again and we'll move on. So what needs to change? What I'd like to suggest to you is that what we need to change most is the way we perceive the world. And I'm not quite sure how this bit of the presentation is going to land with you, because I am aware of the culture in my country, but I'm less aware of the culture in your country. So I'd be really curious to see what you think of this, whether it resonates with you or not. Gregory Bateson was one of the first systems thinkers, and he spent a lot of his life noticing how nature worked, the interdependencies between the different elements in ecosystems. And this is one of his quotes: "The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and, and the way that's meant to be, the way that people think." So what I'd like to suggest to you is that we've actually got a change in perspective to make. And just as an illustration of that for you, I'm wondering if you've got a pen handy that you can pick up at this point in time. If you don't, just use your pointer finger. And what I'd like you to do is hold it up in the air and aim it at the ceiling. And then turn your pen and your hand in a clockwise direction. Can you do that? Just get it like you're drawing a circle on the ceiling in a clockwise direction, around and around. And then keep your hand going in the same movement and gradually bring the pen or your finger down in front of your eyes. Keep it going around in exactly the same direction, exactly the same movement in front of your eyes now. And now it looks different, doesn't it? A different perspective. And now put the pen down below your eyes, but don't change the movement, just keep it going the same way. What direction is your pen moving in? Pop it into the chat box, please. What direction is your pen now moving in, or your finger now moving in? Are you able to pop that into the chat box for me? Do we need to do it again? Is it still going clockwise or is it going anti-clockwise? Okay, we need to do it again, I think. Start up on the ceiling. Start drawing your circle on the ceiling in a clockwise direction. Keep that movement going exactly the same. Gradually bring it down in front of your eyes and then down underneath your eyes. And as you look at the pen from above instead of below, you should notice that it's actually moving anti-clockwise now. Yes, Priya. Lydia, yes, it's moving anti-clockwise, but you haven't changed the movement of your hand. So the way we perceive something is actually really important, because the way we perceive something also determines what we decide to do. And if in doubt, take that trick to the next party with your friends and see if you can confound them with it. So perception is really important, and really that's what I want to share with you here, a shift in perception. And here's one way of thinking about that shift in perception. A distinction that's become really apparent that perhaps we took for granted. These are photos of two different types of systems. The first is a passenger jet airliner that we are travelling on less and less these days. But this is an example of a complicated mechanical system. We often use the terms complicated and complex interchangeably, don't we? But they're actually quite different systems. And I want to be very specific about the type of system that they are. You can see they're different just from the pictures, but they behave very differently. A complicated mechanical system can be rebuilt exactly the same way, time and time again. And they are predictable, they are controllable, they are consistent. And we fix them by identifying the part that doesn't work and repairing and replacing that part. So that's called a reductionist approach. And it works very well in these mechanical types of systems. The other types of systems with those gorgeous smiling faces looking at us in the photo there are living systems. They're complex adaptive systems. This is an example of complexity, and you are one of these living systems. These living systems are called living because they are able to replicate themselves, reproduce themselves from their own parts. That's something a plane doesn't do, right? And they are able to regulate themselves. So if you think of your body, you regulate your own temperature, for example. And they have emergent properties, unlike a plane. When a child is put together well, it lives. It has the emergent quality of life. And as it interacts with the environment around it, it has the capacity to learn, adapt, and change. And that is something that a mechanical system without artificial intelligence, I might add at this point, doesn't have the capacity to do. The way we influence these living systems is quite different. It's very hard to control them. Anyone with a 2-year-old knows that. And we have to look at the whole to appreciate the interrelatedness of all of the parts. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But we influence living systems by understanding the relationships between the parts rather than reducing it down to the part and looking at the part out of the context of the whole. We appreciate living systems, we can influence living systems by actually looking at the whole and trying to understand the interrelationships between the parts. So I don't know if it's starting to occur to you or not, but our approaches to organisational design, management and leadership are largely a product of understanding mechanical or complicated systems. And that way of understanding the world has been transferred into our organisations through a general worldview that has permeated the Western society for around about 300 years. It's called the Newtonian paradigm, or the mechanistic paradigm, or sometimes the scientific paradigm. And it was, unintentionally, I suppose, just bought into the way that we did things when the Industrial Revolution started and we started creating conveyor belts. And we needed people with low education standards and not very many skills to do quite robotic work. And so the structures that we put in place in that time have kind of carried through, and they've been influenced by things like the military as well. But they've continued on and influenced our organisational lives. I'm wondering if you can think of some examples of the way in which they have that mechanistic paradigm, that complicated way of doing things actually shows up within our organisations at this point in time. I'm just going to stop sharing again for a moment and maybe we can go back to the chat box. Smita, is there anything in there?
Yeah, so Vinita has made a comment, and if you can just throw some light. So she says, sometimes you call relationships complicated.
Yeah, relationships are definitely complex. Just like our children and our partners and spouses. Yeah. And so is nature, actually. And I want to share a model with you in a moment that suggests that, you know, we humans are just nature. And it's no surprise that we are complex, just like nature, because we are a part of nature. That's what we are. Yeah, so I'm glad you're thinking. That's lovely. And I don't see any other comments there at the moment, so perhaps I'll have a go at answering my own question for you. So how many of you actually work in an organisation? Can I just have yeses or nos? So you might coach with inside organisations, or you might actually work inside a larger organisation. So a yes, used to work. So you're familiar with organisations. So for those of you who are familiar with working inside organisations, I started life as a corporate strategic planner and I worked for Chrysler Australia. We were, not currently, but in the past, yes, used to work there. Lovely. So you know what I'm talking about. Fabulous. Because organisations are the same the world over, in my experience. I started as a corporate strategic planner for a car manufacturing company, and I used to be involved in creating 15-year plans. That's how far out we planned. We would have Model X 15 years out, and that was pre-computers too. So we used to have some very long nights crunching all of those numbers. But strategic plans are actually the way we go about it are actually an example of how this mechanistic paradigm shows up in our organisations. So for a start, they're generally created by the people at the top, those that are in charge of the machine. Yeah, they're generally created by the executive team or the senior management team. There's not too many people in the lower echelons of the organisation who are asked what they think the next strategic move should be, is there? So it starts at the top. The change is done to the machine by those in charge of the machine. And that fits very well with the Newtonian view of life, because Newton was a very godly man and he saw the universe as a machine. And he saw God as the keeper of the clock, if you like. And that God would tinker with the clock when it needed it and look after it. And there are echoes of that in our organisations, I think, with leaders at the top of the organisation with the authority to tinker with the machine and to change it when it needs to be changed. And so in organisations, we often see change done to the machine. And we use a lot of language around our organisations that reflects the machine metaphor as well. I don't know about in India and some of your other countries that you might be from, but in Australia, we use expressions like, it's working like a well-oiled machine. And people refer to themselves, employees talk about themselves as cogs in the machine. Is that something that's familiar to you? I can see a comment from Lorna there relating to the strategic planning. Yes, in human resources. Thank you very much. So it's not just here there. That's something that happens where you are too. So, and then we take the plan, and it's done at an organisational level, and we break it into little bits and we farm it out to different divisions, don't we? We break it down into parts, and we break it down into even smaller parts, and we give it to each individual with KPIs, and we tell them that they have to achieve it on their own, and if they don't, their performance will be hammered. And yet, who can do anything on their own? Who can be truly responsible for delivering one tiny little piece on their own? Don't we all deliver work together? What I do depends upon what you do, and you pass something to me and I do something to it, and then I pass it to someone else. It's all interconnected. And so this idea of just breaking it down into tiny bits, can you hear the echo of that mechanistic, that complicated, that machine-like approach in our organisations? I could go on. The structure of the organisation, the way we try to manage performance in organisations. I could go on, but I'll run out of time, so I won't. So the alternative then is to use a different lens. And the different lens that has been emerging since the 1950s has been this lens of living systems. And the alternative is to move from controlling and making changes to the machine to actually liberating the creativity that nature put into the system in the first place, and enabling that change to actually emerge from and through people. It's inherent. The potential for that learning and change is inherent in us as people. It's lying there as dormant potential. And all we have to do is create the conditions in which it can be liberated. Let me show you another picture, if you can bear with me to try and transfer this over to sharing my screen again. And so here I hope you can see a picture of a starling murmuration. And Lydia will be familiar with starling murmurations from the UK, and perhaps Lorna, I'm not sure where you're from. But I am fascinated with starling murmurations because they are just so gorgeous. And if you haven't seen a video, I really encourage you to Google one and have a look at a starling murmuration at sunset. Thousands of birds moving together, creating gorgeous, unpredictable patterns, but always moving together. And who determines how they do that? And when scientists first started looking at these starlings, they started asking questions like, who's the lead starling? How do they communicate to let each other know where to go? The scientists modelled the behaviour of the starlings, and that's where the complex adaptive systems terminology comes from. Complex adaptive systems are computer models that mimic the behaviour of living systems to try and understand how living systems behave. And we turn that into shorthand, we call it complexity for short. So that's how all those terms are related. The scientists started creating models and they started trying to work out how the starling murmurations did this. And eventually, after lots of iterations, they found out that they could mimic the starling's behaviour by making each starling stay as close as possible to 7 other starlings, which is really quite amazing when you think about it. Such a simple rule at the heart of such complex, unpredictable behaviour. And as it turns out, there's a lot of simplicity at the heart of complexity. And some of that simplicity is that we've made, I would like to suggest to you, that we've made organisational change so hard. We've made it really complicated by making it come to the top, from the top, and then trying to impose it on people. When in fact, when people, if they're given the chance to make sense of something, they will just change. That it will make sense for them to change. And so the role of leadership might actually be more around engaging people that they are working with to the vision, purpose, and values of the organisation, so that people can autonomously make decisions based on their connection, their understanding of the vision, values, and purpose of the organisation. There's a lot more to be said about that and how you connect people to that, because you can't impose those values on them. So it needs to be co-created and shared. But I won't go too deeply into that because it diverts us a little bit from our intention tonight. But what I wanted to sort of leave you with is the message that it might sound complex. It sounds awful, perhaps, that word complex. I know sometimes in my life, I've got enough complexity. I don't need any more. But I would like to leave you the message that there's a lot of simplicity at the heart of complexity. And we can make a life a lot more easy for ourselves, actually, a lot less stressful if we stop trying to control the uncontrollable. And really, that's about at the stage that I would like to leave you thinking about the starling murmuration, that there is simplicity at the heart here, that understanding the way living systems behave and understanding some of the principles upon which living systems are founded will help us perceive and understand what is happening in the world around us now. The pandemic, the virus, is a graphic example. It is a living system and it is behaving as a living system. Unpredictable in the specific. It's making our lives very uncertain. It's uncontrollable, but we can influence it. We have learned how to influence it. Understanding living systems helps us find new possibilities for working and doing, and it can help us generate even more powerful outcomes, because it is possible to control it within a small space of time and proximity. But what you can control is very self-limited. So we can find more powerful outcomes if we are willing to let go of control and actually learn how to work with the flow of what is emerging in the living system. And we'll reduce the stress inherent in trying to control the complicatedness, because these systems don't behave like aircraft. They're very, very different. Here's another way of thinking about that, and I'll just touch on this really quickly because I want to give you a moment to actually ask some questions in a moment. So if you've got any bubbling up in your head, get ready to pop them into the chat box for me. So maybe you can remember, those of you who have listened to Peter Hawkins before, say the ecology is in the room with us right now. We're breathing it in. I've got plants here. And in addition to which, we are actually a part of that ecology. This diagram perhaps explains, is another way of understanding that statement that Peter often makes. This is called a holarchy. It's the way that biologists think about the way in which ecosystems are organised, not in hierarchies like we do in our organisations where we've got power over people, but in holarchy, where actually the system becomes sustainable when each subsystem's interests are negotiated with the whole. And this is an ongoing process all the time. At the moment, if we go back to the opening of this presentation, humans are in a negotiation with Mother Earth, if you like, and I think Mother Earth might win this one. Our interest is actually tied up in the health of the whole. And if we don't recognise it, the whole will put limits on what we can do. And I think that's starting to happen. So this is a holon within holarchy, nested systems within systems. And you can get a feeling of this just by looking at your own body. A tiny little cell in perhaps your heart. The cell is whole and complete in itself, and it's the beginning of the holarchy. But it's a whole and complete part of your heart, which is a whole and complete part of your circulatory system, which is a whole and complete part of your entire body. But that's not all of you, is it? You still have a psychic piece of you that adds to your complexity too, your consciousness, your awareness, the way you think, the history of your family and your cultural background that is living in the presence with you now as well, that makes you this wonderful, complete, unique human being. And then you are this unique human being within a part of a family or a team at work. And then that is a whole and complete unit that is part of a division or an organisation at work, or you might be part of a community group. And that is whole and complete and a part of the larger community and society that we all live in, and the natural environment upon which we depend to live. And it seems to me that organisations have forgotten that they're actually connected to the rest of the world, that their actually view is limited at the edge of their own organisation. And we can help them to develop a different perception of that by asking different questions. And that's what a lot of Peter Hawkins' work is about. So there's some important things here to notice, that all of this is going on at the same time. These interrelationships are happening all at the same time, and we're largely unaware of them. And it's actually bringing it into our awareness that's important. And isn't that the role of coaches? To become aware and to help people become aware and to help them take responsibility for doing things differently. In this interrelationship that goes between not just one element and another element, but multiple elements through the whole system, it's irreducibly uncertain. And that's a phrase that was used by Donella Meadows, one of the authors of The Limits to Growth in 1972, I think it was, the Club of Rome report that was the first report on the possible limits to growth that we're experiencing now. And that irreducible uncertainty is a great place for coaching, and it can be very confronting for many leaders because they often think that they should feel certain, that they should know, and that's an unrealistic expectation that they have of themselves. And so what's really important here in this diagram, I think, which really simplifies oversimplifies the complexity of a living system in all of its beauty, is that we see our self-interest as interdependent with the health of the whole. And when we start looking at wholes, we see a window into the world of the spirit as well. That this is often a window into the spiritual world and the spiritual side of people too. And that, you know, the great Taoist traditions, the Vedic traditions, they've been telling us this for so long, and science is just catching up. So let me pause there and see if you've got any questions before we move on.
There is one question from Vinita, and she says, how does complexity influence outcomes of something which has been mechanized or being done complicated? What would be the influence on living systems if the shift happens when time is a factor in an organizational setup?
So these are shifts in, thanks very much for your question, Vanita. I really appreciate it, first of all. So I'm going to answer that in two stages. So the first is to point out that these are just like pairs of glasses that we are using to view exactly the same thing. And so we can use the mechanistic lens in our glasses to view the organisation, and we can interpret it in one way. Or we can use the complexity lens to look at the organisation as a metaphor for the organisation, and we can interpret it in another way. So it doesn't actually change the reality, it changes the way we interpret it. Does that make sense? That's my first response. Secondly, I have been working with teams, particularly in the areas of sustainability, but this would be true for any teams working, particularly in government departments, who are dealing with complex policy issues. So I have been working with teams responsible for sustainability in Adelaide, and we've put the lens of complexity over their work and said, how would your work change if we viewed it through this lens? And it has changed their approach to their work. It has changed the way they create projects. It has changed the way they embed certain values in all of their projects so that they are connected to a vision that they hold for the future. It's changed the way they, I hesitate at the word measure. It has changed the way they monitor their success, because we move more to using indicators rather than measures. Measures can be quite Newtonian, and I know this is probably blowing your mind at this point, and we need more time to explain that. But it has changed the way that they go about doing their work. And one of the things that they've noticed is that they can actually achieve a lot more with the same amount of resources when they put the lens of complexity over. So they can be more effective, they can find more leverage points, more places where they can get a bigger bang for their buck, if that's a phrase that you use, that you actually get more leverage in the system just by viewing it differently. I hope that gives you some sort of answer. Has that helped at all? Or have I just confused you further? You're very brave, Anita. Thank you. A simple yes will do. Are there any other questions? No? Okay. Okay. So let me share, how are we going for time? 6:30. Okay. So let me share this pathway, and then I'd like to ask Francesco to share a little bit of his pathway, and we'll see how they match up, hey? So let me go back to my beautiful slide here. And I'm going to whiz past that. You know how you make slides and you put way too much content in, don't you? So how do you develop this capacity of working systemically within systems? And I've discovered this for myself. So this is just an example of my pathway, really. And it is the foundation for the book that was mentioned earlier. And I've stepped people through this quite deliberately, chapter after chapter. But in my research, I was operating within an organisation for a number of years and using this lens of complexity to view the organisation through. So I think the first part of developing the capacity to work systemically is actually to purposefully start to understand more about how natural systems work. Study the environment, study natural ecologies, read about how this paradigm of living systems is being applied to organisations and leadership. Inform yourself, learn more, and then practice actually seeing the world through that lens. So this was my journey where I learned a lot, and I learned a lot from trying to apply the lens in practice as well. And as you do, you start to become aware that your context has changed. The old ways of leading, where the leader has to know all of the answers and be out in front and tell people what to do, when you start operating in the lens, through the lens of complexity, you start to notice that that type of leadership isn't very effective. Because once we start looking through the lens of complexity, we start to see how everyone perceives everything differently. And that's a part of the complexity. I'm just one person with one perspective. And so to be able to find solutions to more complex challenges, I actually need to engage everyone's perspective. And I need to engage them in a way that enables answers to come from them rather than me telling them the answers and imposing them on them. Does that make sense to you? So the personal qualities and awarenesses that we need as a leader become quite different. And they shift to qualities like trust, trusting people and trusting the system, the people in the system, to come up with the answers. Humility, to accept and know that we don't know the answers. And in fact, not only do we as the leader not know the answers, but we can't, any of us, know the answers. We actually have to try stuff out because these systems are inherently uncertain. And so we have to experiment our way forward. And that takes a bit of humility. We're always learning. These systems are always changing and they're not static. So once you've found something out about them, you might have learned something this time, but you'll learn something different next time. So it takes a bit of patience. You know how we're used to creating change management projects and putting them into a Gantt chart and getting them on time and across the organisation at the same time. Change doesn't actually happen like that. It works its way through the system in its own good time, and you need some patience for that. And I mentioned a little bit earlier this idea of vision. Vision is still really important quality, but it's actually the leader helping create a space for everyone to co-create the vision together so that they've actually created the new neural pathways in their own head to really feel connected with it. And they've reprioritized their own values in their own hearts as well in order to really be connected in. I'd hesitate to use the word aligned because that's such a mechanistic idea. So a co-created vision and the capacity to help your people generate a co-created shared vision is really important. And then an awareness, developing an awareness that broadens out into the system and has a depth to it as well. And so it's wide and it's deep. Broadening our awareness, broadening our consciousness, if you like, is an important quality too. So these qualities become more important because we're within a different context. And then moving up the triangle a little bit further, there are different systems, analytical frameworks and tools that we can use to help understand what we're seeing as well. And a few frameworks that you might be familiar from Ronald Heifetz's The Adaptive Leadership Framework, that's got a number of tools in it, and just systems thinking has a number of tools. And there's a few from Robert Keegan as well that can be very helpful in this space. And up the very top of the triangle there are the skills that we might need, and they're the skills of emergence, the skills of letting people actually come and learn for themselves and change as a result of as a result of having learned. And these are the skills of coaching, aren't they? And so we need to learn how to be able to do that in larger and larger groups as we engage larger groups and get different perspectives together too. So I hope that gives you a flavour of the pathway. And I think over time, it actually becomes an embodied sense. It's not something that's just happening cerebrally. You can actually feel it. We get a lot of data from our entire body. And when we walk into an office, for example, you would know whether it feels joyous or not, whether it feels positive in its energy. And that's data you're getting from your body. So it becomes embodied. And I might just stop there, I think. I think that's enough. So I'd really like to invite you, Francesco. So I've got a little graphic example of a pathway here, but I wonder what's been your pathway as you've wandered through, and you know, you've been working with people for a long time, and I wonder if you've had an aha moment as well, like I did, and how you've learned more, and what you've tried out, different frameworks, and where you might be at the edge of your own skill, perhaps. Would you like me to take that off, the slide off? That would, yeah, you won't be able to be seen if I
could.
did.
That might be good. Thank you.
And I just want to enchant everyone with the picture of the Australian bush there in fog. There you go. Thanks so much, Francesco. I really appreciate it.
That's fine. I think I'll just take no more than 10 minutes or less than that. But yeah, thanks for the invitation. Welcome everyone, and great to be part of the audience as well. And so thanks, Josie. I get to relearn or just rethink through some of the material and content that you've actually shared with me of late, which is great. So yeah, I think for me, I guess the journey and path I'm on, which I feel I'm at, I feel in a way I've worked for a significant period of time in my own industry, which is around software development, and but I feel like I'm on the cusp of this systemic approach to coaching and bringing a lot of things together from that I've experienced and understood over a number of decades, and the things are changing so rapidly now. So if I go back to when I first actually started my working career, and most of my, if I look back now, a lot of what we did within that software development world was actually a lot simpler back then, and maybe a lot of it was complicated, but it was less complex than what it is now. And I think now things that we deal with, even that there was a point in my own career within software development where it became much more complex. And I guess in a way, all the software and technology is such a big part of all of our lives and the companies and organizations we work in. And there's this real shift that happened at a certain point in time. So I've had probably a few aha moments in my career, and one was as a practitioner, as a software developer, and then ultimately as a leader of teams of software developers. I realized there was a point in time where I no longer had the right solution or experiment to try, because software development is a little bit like writing experiments, and you are dealing with quite a bit of that VUCA world. There's a lot of things that are ambiguous or volatile, because until somebody sees something, they don't know what they want or what's possible. So there was this moment where I realized, and I think that was a big part of changing my leadership style, or what I expected from leaders, is that I realized if I had 10, 15, 20 developers, very skilled, experienced knowledge workers, I no longer had the right, I no longer had the right answer. I was the wrong person, because what the problems we're trying to solve were quite complex. So I started to shift my own style of leadership. And I guess that took me into this world team leading and project management. And again, even through project management, it started off very much, yes, there are times when a complicated problem is dealt with in a you know, I would always use that analogy sometimes of when it's complicated, we can apply a traditional or an engineering approach, but when it's complex, we need to take a more agile approach or more a scientific approach of experimenting and learning and adapting, which sort of led me into this whole world, agile world, which is my sort of bread and butter. And what I love doing is working with teams and people and organizations that want to adopt agile ways of working, and for the right reasons, because they want to, for me, it's about being humanistic, you know, creating great opportunities for organizations to learn and adapt and create, you know, great value for their people and their customers. What I found from a coaching perspective was, because I'd come out of this very technical background, mathematics, programming, everything for me was quite black and white. I was always very much, you know, here's the answer. You've got to get a solution. And even as an agile practitioner, when I started the coaching journey or started, you know, looking after agile teams, when I really reflect back now, I was effectively mostly mentoring or training or consulting. It was very rare that I took what I would say is a true coaching stance. But again, I had that moment where I thought that's really what I need to do. I need to be posing the right questions and not trying to give answers all the time. From my own perspective, you know, that facilitating was something that I worked on a lot, and that sort of led me into more coaching. So, okay, instead of trying to be training or consulting, what if I start facilitating, working on skills to be more facilitating, co-creating with people, which sort of led into coaching. I've tried a lot of different things, and I think that's where what I was finding in those early paths was it was very transactional. So, and I was struggling. What was really important to me, it's always important to me, is where's the value? Am I creating value for the situation that I'm in? So as a coach, I want to be a coach. I want to be a great leader. I want to help people become great leaders and great coaches. So am I creating value? And what I found is probably what I was doing was yeah, in one way transactional. I was dealing in the moment with the person or the team that I was working with. In a way, and I think I actually just recently, thanks to Josie's suggestion, watched Professor Peter Hawkins, and he talked about I was having too much empathy, right? My empathy was all in the room with that situation. So in that diagram that Josie had, you know, my empathy was with that whole on. That's it. I'm with that individual, and I was focused on that. And I could see the value wasn't coming out of that coaching approach. There was a lot of trust and empathy, but not enough change. You know, like I think you need that tension, right? You need to create a little bit of tension to create a different thought or to create a different action. And I think I was missing that. So I had all these disparate ideas. You know, I've got this agile mindset, learning and adapting. I'm really passionate about the future of work. I've got a young son. I really feel passionate about that, because I know when I feel I'm doing my best, I'm in an environment that is helping me do that. And that's all, to me, it's a lot of that is about leadership and the way that you know, work and our work and life come together. So that whole humanistic point of view, and also trying to understand complexity. I was using that you know, the Kniffen model from David Snowden and talking about VUCA, but it wasn't really coming together for me. And also, I was lacking the ability to influence. So a couple of things here. So my journey started, you know, I started hearing about Peter Senge and the Fifth Discipline, which is, you know, the book's been around a long time. I finally got a copy of it, started getting interested in that, meeting people like Josie and others, and that started to change the way I started to look at things. And really, I guess trying to get to a point quickly, it has been through, recent work with Josie and getting through the book, Big Little Shifts, but taking me to a place where I'm starting to be more patient around my coaching. So for me, in the pyramid there, I really looking at that, observing, creating space. Yes, all these sort of disparate ideas are fantastic, but it's actually about creating some simplicity in the way I approach it, and to create, more space and patience when I'm in my coaching, when I'm working with people, and I'm trying to take that into my practice at the moment. I'm also taking more of a view around partnership with my I like the actual term counterparts as opposed to coachees or mentees. I like the fact that we work together. In fact, I think even in that talk that Professor Peter Hawkins did recently, he talks about that it is a partnership. I really like that, because the best ideas will come from that partnership, working together. And I think the other aspect that was been a bit of an aha moment for me, even when thinking about this today and some recent case study work I'm doing for our course, is I had this real concept around linear change, but I've moved away from that. And even years ago, I was trying to help a group of organizational change management professionals that were really struggling with agile delivery, because in agile delivery, you're pivoting and changing maybe direction, and this whole concept that of co-creation and evolutionary change, incremental experimentation, and that whole concept of adapting. So I'm spending a lot of time in that space at the moment, because most of what I'm doing is,
Is that your edge at the moment?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think, in general, I've from a coaching perspective, I think I saw someone write "learn and unlearn," and that's spot on. It's just going. It's a constant cycle, right, of learning new things, trying new things, and unlearning old habits. So that's that emerging piece.
Gorgeous.
So thank you for letting me share that. I'm happy to have a bit of, I'm conscious of the time too, to have some discussion.
Yeah.
Happy to, if people have questions, or you want to dive deeper, Josie, it's up to you.
No, let's just see what comes from the folk that are here.
Oh, okay. I'm just reading that comment. Do you think, especially in software, thank you, Vanessa. Do you think, especially in software development, you would need a blend of complexity and process orientation? Complicated, maybe, to ensure there is more control on output, especially these times where there is pressure to close out deliverables sooner. Yeah, look, I think something I learned when I was doing my agile coaching studies, the coach that trained me actually used that the Kniffen model from David Snowden, and I'd been introduced to it before, but he used it in a way which resonated with me. Is that, in those different, I don't know what the right term is, the different modes you've got, you've got complicated and the different, so if you there are simple things that we just do, we don't plan, we just get them done, but there are times when things are complicated, but there's some best practice here that we can apply. So yes, in that sort of software development world, there may be certain things that are more aligned or attuned to working in that particular way. However, in other occasions, when things need to emerge, we need to take more that in that complexity quadrant. It's more about a scientific approach. That was the bit that resonated with me when James King said, if you're dealing in the complicated quadrant, you might take a more traditional engineering waterfall approach, whereas in a more complex environment, it's more scientific, which was a nice way to explain in agile, because sometimes people think agile is chaos, but it's not. It's very controlled experiments, very scientific approach. So yes, sometimes. So I think, to go back to the question, sometimes you can be operating in a in a software development sense, in a very agile, dealing with complexity, and then maybe you solve the problem, and then you can then take it into the complicated quadrant, because now you need to scale it out. Or you might be in the complicated quadrant and then come up against something new, or some new technology, or some new situation, and then you take that into a more emerging practice. So I think you move, don't you? I think, and I'm thinking, if I was taking that more systemic view, that's what you're doing all the time. I mean, curious.
Yeah.
So there's another question here.
Can I just add a little bit in there, Francesco? Yes. So I've had this argument with David Snowden too. So, and last time we did speak, my question was around how does the nature of the system actually change just because you decide to see it differently, and he never really found an answer to that question. And so I think, when we are looking at systems, some of them have an inherent nature, and it's hard to get past that inherent nature. You as a human being are never complicated. You are always a living system. You don't change. So I think it's worth being aware of that. And I think the Kynefin model can be really helpful. Because it does remind us that we're not actually leaving behind that complicated Newtonian type of paradigm. We're using it when it's appropriate. And that's the key to it, that we have overgeneralized the use of it, I think, to systems that aren't complicated. And we've applied it to absolutely everything indiscriminately. So can we be more discerning around that, I think, is the way I think about it. Can we choose approaches that are more applicable to the type of context that we're in? And I think that's echoing exactly what you just said. Yeah. And I'm wondering if there's any other questions here. There's another one from Vanita. You're the source of all questions, Vanita. When we use tools and frameworks, aren't we going back away from complexity again? These are tools and frameworks that actually come from the paradigm of complexity. They're not from a different paradigm. So I think it's really important to use tools and frameworks that are actually consistent with the way that you're perceiving the world, the way that you're actually engaging with the world. So they're different sorts of tools. And I think over time, as you actually start to embody a systemic practice, you rely on those tools less and less because you're actually intuiting what's going on without using the tools. But the tools and frameworks can be helpful to help you practice thinking and seeing in that way. So that would be my response to that. I think we're getting pretty close to our terrific. Yeah, we're getting pretty close to the edge of our time, I think. May I just close out? And Francesco, sure. I'm just wondering if we can all thank you enormously. Thank you. I didn't know some of that story. That was fabulous.
I'm very complex.
You're very complex.
Aren't we all? Thank you.
So I'm wondering if I can just share my screen again. Here we go with the challenge once more. I just want to leave you with 5 things that you could do immediately to extend your practice further. First of all, I think is that it's really important to recognize the need to evolve our coaching practices, and the need is here, it's now, and coaching is moving and evolving itself, and it's moving towards a systemic practice. So I really encourage you to recognize that and to start to be curious about it if you're not already. To start, you might try using that hold-on map to practice perceiving more systemically. You might even practice using it as you listen to the news or read the news, whatever you do. Which particular hold-ons are being talked about. Often when they give the news, they give it very simplistically, and it's just about one hold-on, one particular part, and not about the relationships between the whole. You might even start noticing the types of challenges that your clients face. Do they have single or multiple causes? And over what time frame? We are so used to just looking at the now, we forget to take into account the patterns of the past. And you might start noticing that most things actually have multiple causes rather than one single cause. I'm going to put in a plug for the Climate Coaching Alliance as well. There's a website there that you could join. All of our resources are free, and you will find some further community and education in that sphere, as well as we start to explore what it means to, we don't very often call it systemic practice, I suppose, but there's a lot of interest in it within that community. And if you'd like to contact me for a copy of those chapters, please do. And I'm not sure if I sent through a link or not that you might have with you, Smita. No? I might be able to find it, and I'll pop it into the chat box.
Sorry, did you send me any link?
I emailed it through to Marla, but I think perhaps it didn't make it to you. So that's okay. I'll just find it. And I'll whiz it up there. I'll do that as you, perhaps I hand it back to you, and
right.
And we'll say goodbye.
Can't see any other questions, so.
There, I just popped that link in there, and you can follow that link and download the chapter.
Vinita says she has one more question.
You're a curious cat.
Please go ahead, Vinita. Okay, she says, curious to know how, and that's for Francesco, curious to know how have you approached performance management for your team using Agile methodology?
Okay, I did see that. I wasn't trying to ignore it, but yeah, that's the intent is always to strive for self-management. So I like the ideas that teams are working to self-manage, and it's very much about being value-driven. So how does that work? If you know, all those whole-ons, the organization, the leadership, the teams, the individuals, that's the intent with the sort of work I try to do. And it's a very complex and arduous journey to get to that point, because there's a lot of, as Josie would say, you know, Newtonian management layers across all that. So shifting from traditional performance management to a system which is, you know, team-led, leadership supported, and cultural organizational change to make that happen. I'm happy to talk more about that if you wanted to, offline, or because it's a big topic.
It's a big topic. Francesco, do you focus more on individual performance or team performance?
I like to, particularly because I work with a lot of product teams or agile teams that, you know, should be more team focus, which is a hard shift to make, because a lot of times might be working with teams that are going through some organizational structural change, where they are used to getting their own, there's individual performance reviews or performance plans. So, but yeah, more of a focus on, you know, team creating the outcomes and value that they're setting out to do.
You're sort of putting your focus on the process of how they work rather than the individual performance. Yeah,
and I think obviously people still need have their own individual areas of mastery they want to develop, and sometimes, you know, actually working with a client at the moment where we're trying to bring in also like the communities of practice, so to create learning opportunities for people to also then develop themselves in their sphere, or learn new skills. They
Yeah.
might actually want to start branching out into different areas.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I
That's
like
lovely.
that.
I can hear the liberation in that. I can hear the
Sorry?
liberation in that. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Liberating all that dormant potential.
Yeah, and I think it's yeah, and people, and even those communities are, you know, is an opportunity for people to self-organize and self-manage themselves.
Yeah.
So they choose rather than being told. Yeah, it's a bit of a theme of mine.
Yeah, lovely.
Thanks, Fanifa.
Well, we might call it a day there. It's getting late here in Australia, and my dinner is calling me.
And here in India, our lunch is calling.
Yeah.
Just one last thing, Josie, you've put a link out there, and do you want to put your email ID for the first two chapters, or people can
So
just...
that link will take you directly to those first two chapters to download it without having to rely on me to respond to an email. But I'll pop my email address in there as well.
All right, I'm just putting in that link again.
There we go.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
All right.
Oh, no, I've spelt it incorrectly. I can't type. There, that's better. Got it right the second time.
All right.
Thank you so much, Smita, for hosting. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Francesco.
Thank you.
Josie.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you, Francesco, and to all the attendees. All right. See you all. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Smita.
Thank you.
May we go now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
See you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.